Grammar school, state school. Grammar school, state school. Grammar school, state school. Oh my goodness, decisions. And in any case, what is all the fuss about anyway? All this grammar school, state school debate. Hi, my name is Joycelyn Akufo. I'm the Managing Director of Geek School Tutoring, your 11 plus specialist. We offer face-to-face tuition to support children preparing for their 11 plus or online, and we also work with children in primary and secondary school covering English, maths and the 3 sciences. So let's talk about this whole state school and grammar school debate. It's loaded with history, and it's loaded with emotion, and it's loaded with politics. Goodness, what in the country is not loaded with politics? But this can be quite a contentious issue, and I will tell you exactly why. So, before we carry on with this amazing video, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so that you will get notified every time a new Geek School video goes up. Enjoy! So, in 1945, somebody called Butler, Member of Parliament, decided that there should be a particular system of education in the UK. Basically, during the Second World War, many children who were in the cities of England were sent to the countryside for safety. Obviously, there was a war going on, and London was being bombed left, right and centre, along with the rest of the country. But in the countryside, many families that had the space would take the children in, and during that time they realized that a lot of the children were unable to read. They were illiterate, they were also innumerate, and it was shocking to a lot of them because obviously their own children were much more advanced, much more able to read and do what they should be able to do as children in the academic sense. And so after the war, somebody called Butler and the government then basically decided to make a difference in that. It was also a way of boosting the morale of the country after such a horrific time of war. Obviously the Second World War was another blow to the country, and morale wasn't what it would be. A tripartite system was set up. Education became compulsory. So it started off being compulsory for children from, let's say, the age of 5 to 15, and then they added an extra year to 60, okay? And the idea was that children would be educated throughout. They would not be allowed to be working in mills and, factories and all these other places. It was illegal for children not to be in school full time, and obviously if they're in school then they would learn to read, to write and so on. Leaving primary school, children would have to sit an exam called the 11 plus, and the exam was so called because children generally sat the exam when they were 11 plus. So literally the day you turn 11, you're 11, but let's just say, this is really technical, isn't it? Honestly, the next day you're 11 in a day, so 11 plus. That's basically the nuts and bolts of it. I was going to go down to the hours, but then obviously you need to know the hour that child was born, and oh my goodness, who's got time for that? Anyway, we now know what the 11 plus is. So that's where the term 11 plus came from, where it was birthed. Great. So they set an exam called the 11 plus, and that exam determined what type of secondary education that child would have. They would either go to a grammar school if they passed the 11 plus, or they would go to a comprehensive, the state schools, or they would go to a technical college.
These are elementary school children working at a competitive examination to try and gain a place in a secondary school. Up to now, only 3 out of 25, or 12 out of every 100, have had the chance of continuing their education until they're 16. The results of this examination, therefore, will give 12 children a better start in life than the remaining 88.
Grammar schools were then seen as the most academic. You had to pass the 11 plus in order to gain entry into the schools. State schools, the comprehensive schools, where children who didn't pass the grammar schools went to. But then, you know, you might have the child that wants to, either they want to or their parents want them to learn a trade. So let's just say that, you know, there was I don't want to be stereotypical, but just for ease, you know, a blacksmith's son might want to follow in his father's footsteps, so he would go to technical college and learn how to be a blacksmith. You know, all those trades, I don't want to say non-academic, because I find that, you know, it gives a connotation which I actually don't agree with, but anyone who wanted to learn a trade, plumbing, locksmiths, you know, all of those types of things, they would go and learn the trade instead of learning history and, you know, maths and all of that type of thing at secondary level. So that's where the whole state and grammar side of things came. Now, if you know a bit about grammar schools, the 11 plus and the history, you know, it's well documented that, you know, grammar schools, the 11 plus in particular, started to leave quite a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And part of the reason for that is because if a child didn't pass the exam, they were seen as being a dunce, okay? However, the issue is that obviously there are not an infinite amount of places in grammar schools. At the time that this was happening, there were a lot more grammar schools than there are now. At the moment, there are 164 grammar schools in England, but there was a time when there was 1,330. The reason why we don't have as many now, that is another video altogether. It's to do with politics, basically. So, and I'll allude to it a little bit. Basically, on paper, this should have been very straightforward. You do the 11 plus, get into a grammar school, do the 11 plus. If you don't get into a grammar school, go to a state school or technical college, and everyone should be happy where they're placed, right? But typically there are some dodgy things going on. Sometimes children who didn't come from the right background may have passed the 11 plus exam, but they were not offered a grammar school place because schools were being even more selective in a way that parents were not made aware of and shouldn't have been happening, because a place at a grammar school was only based on the test. That's what it's supposed to have been based on, but they were the wrong colour, for example. So over time, many of the working parents did not want the 11 plus exam because they felt that it was unfair. And for some of the children from a working class background, when they got to grammar schools, you know, they were bullied, maybe because of the financial differences between them and those from more financially secure or just richer families. Maybe their uniform might not have been pristine and new. You know, children can be interesting at times. effectively, you know, many of the working class families did not want their children going there. Some didn't want their children to go to grammar school because they didn't want them to turn into something they're not, you know, become all these terms that they're just so loaded, you know, basically become posh when actually the rest of the family isn't, and be sort of disillusioned about who they are. So that is what started this whole thing. So, you know, by the 60s, there was, I don't want to say an uproar, but people were not necessarily happy with grammar schools. By the way, independent schools were always around and they've carried on all the while. But that, obviously, they're fee-paying schools and so on. But in the 60s, you know, basically when you look at the history of this thing, every time the Labour government came into power, lots of grammar schools shut down. And then when the Conservatives came into power, they basically kind of stopped the shutting down of grammar schools. And eventually what happened is that in the Labour government, the Labour voting areas of the country, basically all the grammar schools practically got shut down. So that's one of the reasons why, you know, some parents think, oh, you know, why are there no grammar schools in Lewisham or Lambeth or Southwark? Well, because they're usually Labour voting areas, because they're, you know, working class areas. They tend to vote for Labour, right? And so they were just being shut down because of the unfairness of what I've described was going on. Whereas the Conservative areas, they wanted the grammar schools, you know. They definitely wanted them. So if you look at counties like Kent, Buckinghamshire, Bexley and so on, they all have a lot of, well, Bexley only has a handful, to be honest. Kent and Buckinghamshire, those are the two biggest 11 plus counties in the country. Now, why I say it's very politicised is because, you know, in an ideal world, children should be able to go to a state or a grammar school and still get the same level of education, a good level of education. However, there are things that mean that for a lot of children who go to state schools, their experience of education is somewhat different. First of all, children have to pass an academically selective exam in order to go to a grammar school. So we can think that those children actually want to learn, and as a basic, they all come in with an average high level of academic ability, okay? A comprehensive state school is not allowed to be academically selective. It's actually illegal for them to be academically selective. And so they are to take children from different bands, you know, like the banding. If you know about any part of this process of how children are given offers for state schools, I might do a video about that some other time, a bit more detail. But basically, you know, they can't take all the children from the band that has the highest academic ability. They've got to take children from all the three bands, so the highly academic, the medium, and those that are not so academic, because, you know, obviously they're non-academic. It's so contentious, this. Basically, state schools are there, comprehensive schools, to support the community, isn't it? So every child should have a rite of passage into those schools, basically. That's probably the easiest way to explain this. So what that means is that in a state school, you know, you tend to have more behavioural management issues because you've got children with a whole variety of needs and abilities, basically. And so a child's experience in a state school would probably be somewhat different from a grammar school because of those behavioural management issues. State schools will by default have a lot more children with special needs and so on. which would in many cases have an impact on their academic ranking at GCSEs and A-levels, for example, if, you know, they even have a sixth form, let's just say GCSEs. So because of that, grammar schools tend to get a much higher GCSE results. Basically, they get higher GCSE results because all the children have entered at year 7 at a high academic ability. These 11 plus exams, the selection tests, are not like the SATs. They are hard tests, harder tests for children. So in order to pass, you need to be really academic and really good, and so on. So they start the school journey at that level anyway. This is where it gets contentious, because in an ideal world, all children, irrespective of the school that they go to, would still receive a high level of education. But when you think about it, you know, if you're a teacher and you apply for a job, where would you want to teach? Wouldn't you want to teach history or maths or whatever, physics, whatever subject you teach, with children who want to learn, as opposed to in an environment where you might even feel a bit unsafe because of the way that some of the students are behaving, the behavioural management side of things, and so on, or where you've got such a mixed dynamic in the classroom where, depending on the subject you're teaching, it might actually be obstructive to the learning, you know. So, you know, obviously you get, oh God, this sounds awful, but in state schools there's a higher occurrence of, you know, just not having teachers, and that's for the STEM subjects, you know, English, maths and the sciences. So I've known it where students in secondary school have come to Geek School for tuition, where they may not have had one consistent maths teacher for a couple of years. They're always having supply teachers and so on, and so their academic attainment isn't what it needs to be, because, you know, there are always issues. We see this a lot, and you don't tend to see it as much, if at all, in the lives of grammar school students and so on. So that's basically the difference, you know, the academic attainment and possibly, you know, the environment. So if it's still around, I don't know if it's still around, but there was a program called Grammar Schools Will They Get In? And I used it as a motivational tool for our students a few years back, because it had Townley Grammar School in Bexley Borough, and it had, I think, Eltham Hill or Eltham something school, a state school in the borough of Bexley as well. And the experiences of the children literally were completely different, you know, completely different, and it was quite a harrowing experience to even watch it, you know, really, because of course you then get a deeper understanding as to why so many children who are academically able and they're in the state school environment maybe don't attain as much, because there's just so much disturbance sometimes, depending on the school, the class, the set they're in, and so on. There's so many different dynamics, and so the children in the grammar schools, their experience was very, very different. It seemed to be a lot calmer. The teachers had more time, you know, to meet with them at lunchtime to help them get that understanding, to improve their grades and so on. So it was really, really, really somewhat of a difference, quite a difference really. And so that's the basic idea, you know, where the whole state versus grammar is concerned. Now, I don't want to leave a dampener on state schools, because there are some really, really good state schools. I want to believe that there are some that, you know, they even attain higher than some grammar schools if you look at the league tables. you know, and I don't want to make it seem like every grammar school is amazing. I'm sure if you went onto one of their mums forums or online and, you know, you did some digging, you'd be able to find some that are not as amazing as it should be, considering that children have sat an exam to get in and so on. But generally, if you look at the data, if you look at the research, grammar schools far outperform state schools academically. Grammar schools, you know, the other issue which is often not talked about a lot, and it kind of goes back to that whole historical debate. You know, if you look at the data, less than 8% of children who get free school meals go to grammar schools. Why? Less than 8%. My goodness, that's appalling in my view. But, you know, so it kind of goes back to this whole thing again. Does that mean that children who are on free school meals are not academically able? It goes back to that whole debate about the unfairness of the grammar schools, because it's only those who are able to afford the tuition, the books and any kind of support for their children can get into grammar school, because obviously they've had that extra preparation to get in. So it's a lot. It's very contentious in some circles, basically. Obviously, ideally, again, there wouldn't have to be such a disparity between the academic accessibility in schools. You know, any child should be able to go to whichever school is closest to them and get the same high quality, high standard, high level of education. But unfortunately, in 2021, you know, unless we want to keep our heads in the clouds, it's just not there, you know, it's just not there. It's a conversation that comes up and then it dies. It comes up and then it dies. And yeah, so basically that is it. So if we look at grammar schools versus state schools, that's basically what causes so much contention, and that's basically what the differences are between them, and that's basically why so many parents go that extra mile to get their children into a grammar school. So I hope that's been helpful. If you're looking for a tutor to support your child in their 11+ journey, head over to geekschool.co.uk and get in touch. I put a lot of information on the website to give you an idea of how we do things at Geek School. Have a look, watch the videos, and get in touch rather. And WhatsApp is usually my preferred, but by all means call or email as well if that's your preferred route, and I'd be very, very happy to help your child along the journey. So please also remember to like, comment and subscribe, and share this video. You must know somebody who has a burning desire to know about the difference between state and grammar schools as well, right? All right then, see you in the next one. Bye.
Collins,